The whole class laughed when the teacher called her to the board. "She'll never make it," whispered her classmates. He crossed his arms and smiled dismissively. "If she can't, she can sit down." But then she picked up the chalk, and what she wrote made the teacher lose color. Don't miss a second of this story that will surprise you with its ending, and join us on this journey. Let me know in the comments where you're watching this story from. Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to receive more stories like this. The silence in the classroom amplified every scrape of chalk against the blackboard. Liana Vergara felt all eyes piercing her back as numbers flowed from her hand onto the green surface before her. The smell of chalk and wood polish mingled with the expensive perfume of students occupying the amphitheater at the prestigious Princeton University. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tried to ignore the growing whispers from her classmates. "She'll fail. Look at her. She doesn't belong here." Professor Alden's sharp, cutting voice interrupted the murmurs. "Miss Vergara." He pronounced her surname with deliberate disdain, stretching the syllables as if they were something unpleasant in his mouth. "We're all waiting, unless you'd like to admit that this level is beyond your capabilities." Liana adjusted the gold sun-shaped pendant hanging around her neck, a gift from her grandmother before leaving the Philippines. The cool metal against her skin brought her back to the present moment. She took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, and turned back to the problem on the board. The partial differential equation wasn't conventional. Professor Alden had modified a classic problem to make it almost unrecognizable to anyone who followed only traditional methods. This wasn't just a test of knowledge. It was a deliberate trap. "Someone should tell her that diversity quotas don't mean you actually belong here," whispered a student in the front row, loud enough for everyone to hear. Stifled laughter echoed through the amphitheater. Liana's face burned. Her hand gripped the chalk so tightly it nearly broke. For a moment, she thought of all the nights her father spent studying technical manuals after long hours fixing the university campus cooling systems. She remembered her mother coming home exhausted from double shifts at the hospital, still finding energy to help with her schoolwork. She glanced at her notebook on the professor's desk, decorated with intricate tinalak patterns, a traditional Filipino fabric. The complex geometric patterns passed down by generations of weavers from the Taboli tribe seemed to pulse before her eyes. And then, as always happened when she entered what her brother called math mode, the world around her disappeared. The numbers began to dance in her mind, rearranging themselves like the colored threads of the weavers from her homeland. Her hand moved with renewed confidence. The sound of chalk on the board became rhythmic, almost musical. "What is she doing?" A student's voice cut through the silence. "That's not in any textbook," murmured another. Professor Alden crossed his arms, his brow furrowing as Liana filled the board with an approach he had never seen before. From the back door of the amphitheater, Professor Naomi Wu, head of the mathematics department, watched with growing interest. She had arrived for a routine evaluation of Alden's class, but her eyes were now fixed on the Filipino student. After 20 uninterrupted minutes of work, Liana circled the final result and placed the chalk in the tray. The amphitheater remained in absolute silence. "Impossible," muttered Alden, approaching the board. "Actually," a female voice resonated from the back of the room, "it's perfectly correct." Professor Wu walked to the front, eyes fixed on the equations. "Udon, absolutely brilliant." Liana turned to face the room for the first time, her eyes meeting dozens of astonished expressions. She adjusted her sun pendant, feeling the now warm metal against her fingers, and remembered her grandmother's words before leaving Manila. "Ipakita mo sa kanila ang iyong talino. Show them your brilliance." Liana Vergara always had a special relationship with numbers. As a child in Manila, while other girls played with dolls, she was fascinated by the patterns in the tinalak fabrics her grandmother collected. The intricate geometric shapes, ancestral symbols of the Taboli people, seemed to tell mathematical stories that only she could decipher. Her grandmother, a retired mathematics teacher, noticed this early fascination and nurtured it with problems and puzzles that challenged Liana's young and eager mind. "The patterns are everywhere, anak," her grandmother would say, using the Filipino word for child. "In the shells on beaches, in plant leaves, even in the rhythms of our traditional music. Mathematics isn't just a Western creation. Our ancestors knew it through other languages." When Liana was 7, her father received an offer to work in the United States as an engineer, and the family saw an opportunity to provide a better future for Liana and her younger brother Gabriel. The American dream, however, proved more complicated than they had anticipated. In the small New Jersey town where they settled, her father, despite having an engineering degree from the Philippines, discovered that his credentials weren't recognized. After months of frustrating job hunting, he accepted a position as a maintenance technician at the local university. Her mother, a nurse in the Philippines, faced an equally difficult process until she could validate her degree, often working double shifts to help with the bills. "It's all worth it for you, mga anak," her mother would say on the rare nights when the family could have dinner together. "Study hard. Education is the only thing no one can take away from you." Liana took those words seriously. While trying to adapt to the new culture and language, numbers remained her refuge. At school, when children mocked her accent or asked things like, "Do you have electricity in the Philippines?" she focused on mathematical problems, always being the first to solve them. In high school, her talent for mathematics became impossible to ignore. She won state Olympiads and eventually a partial scholarship to Princeton. Her parents cried the day she received the acceptance letter. "See, anak, your hard work is paying off," her father said, tears in his eyes, holding the envelope with the university seal. "We're so proud of you." Their tiny apartment exploded in celebration that night. The family prepared pancit and lumpia, traditional Filipino dishes, and danced to music from their homeland. When her father played a kundiman, a traditional love song, on his old guitar, even the neighbors came to join the party. The next day, reality set in. The scholarship was partial, and the remaining cost was still prohibitive. Without telling Liana, her parents mortgaged the small house they had managed to buy after years of saving. Her mother took more hospital shifts, and her father started working weekends as a rideshare driver. "Don't worry about us," they insisted whenever Liana expressed concern. "Just study and make it worthwhile." The burden of that expectation weighed on Liana as she walked through Princeton's imposing corridors. In the first days, she marveled at the beauty of the historic campus, with its Gothic architecture and meticulously maintained gardens. But she soon realized that despite all its beauty, this world wasn't designed for people like her. In her first week, a student asked if she was on a racial quota scholarship. A professor commented, surprised, on how articulate her English was. At fraternity parties, she was often confused with international students from Asia, ignored when she said she grew up in New Jersey. "It's strange," she confided to her only friend Raj, an Indian-American electrical engineering student. "It's like I'm invisible until someone needs a diverse person in a promotional photo." Raj laughed, though without humor. "Welcome to the club. At least you don't have people asking if your dad owns a convenience store." Despite these obstacles, Liana was determined to prove her worth. She chose pure mathematics as her major, despite several advisors suggesting more practical fields. She enrolled in the most challenging courses and stayed in the library until closing, often being the last to leave. That's when she met the infamous Professor Richard Alden. With over 30 years of career, Alden was known both for his mathematical brilliance and his intolerance for any student he considered below his standards. Rumors circulated about how he deliberately tried to make students from humble backgrounds drop his classes in the first weeks, filtering the impurities. he supposedly called it. Against all advice, Liana enrolled in his advanced number theory course. When he saw her name on the roster on the first day, Alden looked over his glasses with an expression that mixed surprise and disdain. "Miss Vergara," he said, stretching her surname again. "Are you sure you're in the right room?" "Yes, Professor," Liana replied, keeping her voice steady despite the flush she felt rising up her neck. "This is advanced number theory, right?" "Yes, but—" he consulted his list again. "I see, diversity." The word came out as a veiled insult, eliciting snickers from some students. Liana felt her stomach sink, but she held her head high. The sun pendant on her neck felt heavier in that moment. In the apartment she shared with 2 other scholarship students, Liana hung a small Tinalak fabric above her desk. The vibrant colors and complex patterns served as a daily reminder of who she was and where she came from. In moments of doubt, she would touch the fabric and remember her grandmother's words. "Ang hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa paroroonan." Those who do not look back to where they came from will never reach their destination. And so, day after day, Liana faced the world of Princeton, determined to prove she belonged there, not just for herself, but for her family, her culture, and for all who would come after her. The weeks following the blackboard incident passed in a strange limbo for Liana. On one hand, her brilliant resolution of the problem had temporarily silenced the whispers. On the other, Professor Alden's cold stare indicated that the battle was far from over. During classes, he began to ignore her completely, never calling her name during discussions, even when she was the only one with her hand raised. When he finally acknowledged her presence, it was only to try to expose her with increasingly obscure and complex questions. "Miss Vergara," he said one day, finally pronouncing her surname correctly, though with a tone laden with condescension. "Since you seem to have such facility with the material, perhaps you could explain to us how to apply Fermat's last theorem in resolving Cartesian paradoxes?" A tense silence hung over the room. Any advanced mathematics student would know the question was absurd, a trap deliberately constructed to confuse her. Fermat and Cartesian paradoxes belonged to completely different fields. "Professor," Liana responded calmly, "Fermat's last theorem deals with specific Diophantine equations and has no direct application to Cartesian paradoxes, which are fundamentally philosophical, not mathematical." Alden's face reddened slightly. "Interesting that you consider yourself qualified to correct a professor with 3 decades of experience, Miss Vergara. Perhaps in your country of origin that's acceptable, but here, I was born in Manila, Professor, but I grew up in New Jersey," Liana interrupted, feeling a wave of heat rise up her neck. "And Fermat's last theorem was finally proven by Andrew Wiles right here at Princeton in 1994. The silence that followed was broken by a few nervous laughs. Alden's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I see you know your historical facts. Let's see how that translates to real performance when the midterm grades come out next week." After class, as she was packing her books, Liana felt a presence beside her. It was Chelsea Morgan, a blonde student from Boston who had never spoken to her before. "That was amazing," said Chelsea, a genuine smile on her face. No one has ever confronted Alden like that." Liana shrugged, trying to appear calmer than she actually felt. "It wasn't a confrontation. I just corrected an error." "Well, it was brave. And that thing you did on the board weeks ago? Everyone's still talking about it." Chelsea hesitated for a moment. "Listen, some of us meet on Thursdays to study in the library. You should come." The invitation caught Liana by surprise. It was the first time someone outside her small circle of diverse friends had invited her to something. "I'll think about it. Thank you." As she walked to her next commitment, a part-time job at the campus library, Liana reflected on what had just happened. The small victory against Alden should have brought her satisfaction, but instead she felt only growing anxiety. She knew professors like him. They didn't forgive easily. The next day, her suspicions were confirmed. When checking her email, she found a message from the scholarship department. Due to a reassessment of qualifications, her partial scholarship was under review. The email mentioned concerns raised by faculty members and requested her presence at a hearing the following week. Panic took hold of Liana. Without that scholarship, there would be no way to continue at Princeton. Her parents were already stretching financial boundaries to pay the uncovered part. Any reduction would be catastrophic. With trembling hands, she called home. Her mother answered, her voice exhausted after a long shift. "Anak, what's wrong? You sound worried." Liana almost told her about the email, about Alden, about everything. But then she heard her father in the background coughing. He was working overtime again, despite the doctor recommending rest for his bronchitis. "Nothing, Mama. Just wanted to hear your voice. How's Papa?" "Tired but good." "He's so proud of you, Anak. Yesterday he showed your campus photo to everyone in maintenance." The knot in Liana's throat tightened. "Tell him I love him, please. I have to go now. Another paper to turn in. Always studying. Take care of yourself, Anak. Mahal kita." "I love you too, Mama." Hanging up, Liana felt a renewed determination. She wouldn't let Alden win. If he wanted war, he would have one. The next morning, she headed to Professor Wu's office. As department head, she might be able to help. To her surprise, the door was open, and Wu motioned for her to enter as soon as she saw her. "Miss Vergara, I was wondering when you would come to see me." "Professor, I received an email about my scholarship." Wu raised her hand, interrupting her. "Yes, I'm aware. Professor Alden alleged that you were disrespectful and questioned your suitability for the program." She adjusted her glasses, studying Liana intently. "What he didn't mention was your brilliant application of the Salazar-Klein theorem." Liana blinked, surprised. "You know Dr. Salazar's work?" "Enrique Salazar was my doctoral colleague." Wu smiled slightly. "His approach to partial differential equations revolutionized the field, and you, Miss Vergara, applied his method in a way that even he didn't consider." A small flame of hope lit in Liana's chest. "So, about the hearing." "The hearing will happen," Wu said, her tone softening. "Unfortunately, I can't simply cancel it, but I suggest you prepare well. And perhaps," she slid a book across the desk, "this material might help." Liana looked at the book, Mathematical Symmetries in Cultural Patterns, by Dr. Tomas Reyes, another Filipino mathematician. Inside was a card with a handwritten note, "Library, Thursday, 7 p.m. "Thank you, Professor," Liana said, understanding the message. Wu was offering help, but discreetly. "You're welcome. And Miss Vergara, your pendant. It's Taboli, isn't it? My grandmother had one very similar." The comment caught Liana off guard. "Yes, it's a solar symbol. Wait, your grandmother was Filipino." Wu smiled enigmatically. "Mathematics has many origins, Miss Vergara, as do all of us." Leaving the office, Liana felt simultaneously relieved and more concerned. She had an ally, but the challenge ahead seemed even greater than she had imagined. As she walked across campus, she noticed a poster announcing a lecture by Alden that afternoon, "Academic Excellence versus Diversity Policies, a Necessary Debate." In that moment, she fully understood this wasn't just about her. It was about everything she represented, a threat to the status quo that Alden and others like him fought to preserve. Clutching Reyes's book to her chest, Liana decided that it wouldn't just be her education at stake in the hearing, but also the right to belong, something no scholarship review email could take away from her. Firestone Library, with its millions of volumes and neo-Gothic architecture, was usually Liana's favorite refuge on campus. That Thursday evening, however, the imposing building seemed particularly intimidating. As she climbed the stone steps, each footfall echoed like a reminder of what was at stake. Entering the main hall, she checked her watch again. 6:55 p.m. The meeting with Professor Wu would be in 5 minutes, and the next day she would face the hearing that could determine her future at Princeton. She headed to the advanced studies section on the third floor, where isolated tables offered privacy for small groups. To her surprise, Wu wasn't alone. Seated at the circular table were also Raj, her engineering friend, Chelsea Morgan from Alden's class, and an older man whom Liana recognized as Dr. Marcus Bennett, Professor Emeritus of Academic Ethics. Miss Vergara, Wu motioned for her to join the group. I believe you already know Mr. Patel and Miss Morgan, and this is Dr. Bennett. Professor, Liana greeted nervously, shaking the man's extended hand. Dr. Wu told me about your situation, said Bennett, his deep voice carrying a slight British accent. I must say I'm deeply disturbed by what I've heard. Liana looked at Wu in confusion, who gestured for her to sit down. Before we fully explain, we need you to understand something, Liana, said Wu, using her first name for the first time. What's happening to you is not an isolated incident. Chelsea slid a folder across the table. This is what we've managed to gather in the last 2 days. Inside the folder were dozens of testimonials from former students, most from minority backgrounds or first-generation university students, describing experiences of prejudice, microaggressions, and in some cases deliberate academic sabotage. Many specifically mentioned Alden. He's been doing this for years, explained Raj. He uses his influence to pressure scholarship committees, sabotage recommendations, question the merit of students who don't fit his ideal profile. But why hasn't anyone done anything? Asked Liana, leafing through the testimonials with growing indignation. Academia is politics, my dear, replied Bennett with a tired sigh. Alden has powerful connections, donors, alumni in positions of influence. Until now, complaints have always been handled individually, easily dismissed as isolated cases. Until now, emphasized Wu. Your hearing tomorrow is different. It's the first time Alden has so openly attacked someone with indisputable academic performance. And that's why we need you, Liana, said Chelsea, leaning forward. Not just to defend yourself, but to expose a systematic pattern. Liana felt the weight of each word falling on her shoulders. What had begun as a personal battle had suddenly transformed into something much larger. Wait, she said, trying to process everything. Why are you helping me? Chelsea, you barely know me, and Dr. Bennett, you're a professor emeritus. Bennett smiled sadly. My wife was Japanese, Miss Vergara. In the 60s, when we married, she faced the same kind of prejudice in academia that you face now. I promised her I would do what I could to change that. As for me, Chelsea added, let's just say I have my own reasons for wanting to see Alden face consequences. Something in her eyes, a momentary vulnerability, suggested a personal story she wasn't ready to share. Liana looked at the documents scattered on the table, feeling a mixture of determination and terror. What exactly do you want me to do? Wu slid another document toward her, the university's official regulations on scholarships and academic conduct. We want you to transform this hearing from a trial into an accusation, Wu said firmly. And for that, we need you to be prepared for what he'll try to do. For the next 2 hours, the group outlined a detailed strategy. Raj, who had experienced similar tactics from Alden the previous year, pointed out common traps. Chelsea, whose family had connections with the administration, provided information about committee members. Bennett and Wu worked with Liana on her presentation, refining each argument. When the clock struck 9 p.m. and the library announced its imminent closing, Liana felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. There was a plan. There was hope. As they said goodbye at the library entrance under the starlit night sky, Wu held Liana's hands between her own. Remember, Miss Vergara, tomorrow isn't just about your scholarship. It's about establishing that people like you, like us, belong in these halls not by concession or charity, but by right and merit. The words reverberated within Liana as she walked back to her dormitory. The campus at night seemed like a different world, soft lights illuminating the century-old buildings, shadows dancing on the stone paths. For a moment, she felt connected to all the people who had walked those same paths, facing their own challenges, their own battles. In her room, she picked up the phone to call her parents, but stopped. What would she tell them? That everything they sacrificed for could be taken away because of a professor's prejudice? That their daughter, in whom they placed so many hopes, was about to face an entire system? Instead, she opened the small wooden chest where she kept her relics from home. Inside, among photos and letters, was a piece of Tanalak fabric her grandmother had given her before leaving. The complex geometric patterns, created by weavers who never had formal education in mathematics, but instinctively understood concepts of symmetry, fractals, and sequences. Touching the fabric, Liana finally let the tears escape. They weren't tears of despair, but of clarity. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be fighting just for herself, but for her family, for her culture, and for every student who would come after her. With this understanding, she took her notebook and began to work. If Alden wanted to question her belonging to the academic world, she would show him and everyone exactly why the patterns her ancestors wove in the colored threads of Tanalak were as mathematically profound as any equation in any Western textbook. When the sun began to rise, Liana finally fell asleep, her notebook full of notes, formulas, and connections that no one, not even Alden, could deny. The hearing room in the administration building was smaller than Liana had imagined. A rectangular table dominated the space, with 7 chairs on one side, occupied by the Scholarship Review Committee, and a single chair on the other side, clearly meant for her. In the rows behind, a few observers, including Raj and Chelsea, waited in silence. Professor Alden was already present, seated not at the main table, but in a side chair, his posture radiating confidence. Next to him, an older man with a board member badge observed the room with an impassive expression. "Miss Vergara, please take your seat," instructed the committee chair, Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and thin glasses. "This hearing will review the concerns raised about your suitability for Princeton's scholarship program." Liana walked to the chair, aware of every gaze following her. She wore a simple, formal outfit, but had pinned a small brooch with the Tanalak pattern to her chest, a silent reminder of her heritage. "Before we begin," continued Mitchell, "I must clarify that this is not a disciplinary hearing, but a review of alignment with the university's values and standards. Professor Alden has raised concerns about your academic approach and classroom conduct that could potentially affect your scholarship status." Liana nodded, trying to appear calm despite her racing heart. She opened her folder and arranged her materials neatly on the table before her. "Professor Alden, would you like to present your concerns?" Mitchell asked. Alden stood with practiced poise, buttoning his tweed jacket. "Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. My concerns are straightforward. While Miss Vergara demonstrates certain computational abilities, she has repeatedly shown disrespect for established methodologies and academic authority." He proceeded to describe the blackboard incident, conveniently omitting Professor Wu's validation of her solution. Then he mentioned their exchange about Fermat's last theorem, portraying it as insubordination rather than a correction of his deliberate error. "Furthermore," Alden continued, his voice dropping to a concerned tone, "I question whether the university's commitment to diversity should extend to lowering our academic standards. Are we truly serving students like Miss Vergara by placing them in environments where they are clearly struggling?" The thinly veiled implication made Liana's blood boil, but she maintained her composure, recalling Wu's advice. "Let him expose himself." "Thank you, Professor Alden," said Mitchell. "Miss Vergara, would you like to respond to these concerns?" Liana took a deep breath. This was it, the moment to stand her ground. "Yes, Dr. Mitchell. First, I'd like to address Professor Alden's description of the blackboard incident." She reached into her folder and produced copies of her solution alongside published academic papers. The approach I used was based on the Salazar-Klein theorem, developed by Filipino mathematician Dr. Enrique Salazar in collaboration with German mathematician Dr. Klein. She passed the papers to the committee members. As Professor Wu confirmed that day, my solution was not only correct, but represented an innovative application of established mathematical principles. A small murmur went through the committee as they reviewed the papers. Alden shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Regarding the comment about Fermat's last theorem, I simply provided factual correction to an impossible question. Any mathematics student would know that Fermat's theorem has no application to Cartesian paradoxes, which aren't even mathematical in nature. Liana paused, then decided to take the risk Wu had suggested. But I believe these specific incidents are not the real issue here. She reached into her folder again and pulled out a slim-bound document. What I have here is a compilation of testimonials from 27 students spanning 15 years, all describing patterns of discriminatory behavior by Professor Alden toward minority, female, and first-generation college students. The room fell completely silent. Alden's face flushed deep red. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "Completely irrelevant to this hearing." "On the contrary," interjected a voice from the doorway. Professor Wu entered, followed by 3 other professors, including the elderly Dr. Bennett. "I believe it's entirely relevant." Mitchell frowned. "Professor Wu, this is a closed hearing. As department chair, I have the right to attend any proceeding involving my faculty or students," Wu replied calmly, taking a seat in the observers section. "Please continue, Miss Vergara." With renewed confidence, Liana explained how Alden had systematically targeted students from underrepresented backgrounds, using his influence to question their scholarships, block recommendations, and undermine their academic confidence. Based on the university's own stated values of inclusivity and equal opportunity, Liana concluded, I would argue that it's not my scholarship that should be under review today. A tense silence filled the room. Alden stood abruptly. "This is a coordinated attack on my reputation," he declared, looking at the board member for support. "These are merely subjective complaints from students who couldn't meet academic standards." "Subjective?" Liana countered, pulling out her final piece of evidence, a statistical analysis she had worked on through the night. The data shows that students of color and first-generation students in Professor Alden's classes receive grades averaging 15% lower than their white legacy counterparts, despite equal or better performance in all other courses. She passed the analysis to the committee. "I correlated this with anonymous course evaluations and found a clear pattern of bias that cannot be explained by academic performance." The board member, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "Miss Vergara, where did you get this data?" "From publicly available course statistics, sir. I simply applied mathematical analysis, the same skills Princeton is supposedly teaching us." The man nodded slowly, then turned to Alden. "Richard, is there any explanation for this discrepancy?" Alden's confident facade began to crumble. "James, surely you don't believe—" "I've seen enough," the board member, James, interrupted, standing up. "Dr. Mitchell, I suggest we adjourn this hearing and reconvene the full Academic Standards Committee to review both Miss Vergara's scholarship status and Professor Alden's grading practices." Mitchell looked momentarily flustered, but nodded in agreement. "This hearing is adjourned pending further review. Miss Vergara, your scholarship remains in place until a final determination is made." As the committee members filed out, throwing troubled glances at Alden, Liana felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. She had expected a fight, not a complete reversal. Professor Wu approached her, a small smile playing on her lips. "Well done, Miss Vergara. Very well done." "What just happened?" Liana whispered, still processing. "James Thompson sits on both the University Board and the Education Equity Commission," Wu explained quietly. He's been looking for concrete evidence of discrimination in admissions and grading for years. You just handed it to him." Alden stormed past them, his face contorted with anger. "Hey, this isn't over," he muttered as he pushed through the door. "No," Wu agreed, watching him leave. "It's just beginning." Outside the building, Raj and Chelsea were waiting with barely contained excitement. "You were amazing," Chelsea exclaimed, hugging Liana impulsively. "I can't believe you pulled it off," added Raj, shaking his head in admiration. Liana felt lightheaded, as if she might float away. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." As they walked across the sun-dappled campus, Liana touched the small Tanalak brooch on her chest. Something had shifted today, not just for her, but perhaps for all the students who would follow. The patterns of power were beginning to rewire themselves, one connection at a time. The week following the hearing passed in a blur of speculation and whispered conversations across campus. Liana tried to maintain her routine of classes, study sessions, and her part-time library job, but it was impossible to ignore the shifting dynamics around her. Students who had never acknowledged her before now nodded in recognition as she passed. A few professors made a point of calling on her in class, as if eager to demonstrate their own inclusivity. Most noticeable was Professor Alden's absence. His classes had been temporarily reassigned to other faculty, pending administrative review, according to the terse email sent to all his students. On a crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted across the paths between Gothic buildings, Liana received a message requesting her presence at the president's office that afternoon. Her stomach knotted with anxiety as she read the formal language. "They can't possibly be reconsidering your scholarship," Raj reassured her over lunch in the dining hall. "You basically exposed systemic discrimination. It would be PR suicide." "Unless they're punishing me for causing trouble," Liana replied, pushing her food around her plate. "Whistleblowers don't always get happy endings." Chelsea, who had joined their regular lunch group since the hearing, shook her head. "My father knows President Harrington. He's progressive, genuinely committed to diversity, not just the optics of it." Despite their reassurances, Liana felt her pulse racing as she climbed the marble steps to Nassau Hall, the university's historic administrative center. The building's grandeur, its weathered stone facade and gleaming cupola, had once intimidated her. Today, it just seemed like another institutional barrier to navigate. The president's assistant, a woman with a kind smile and efficient manner, led her not to an office, but to a small conference room where several people were already seated. Liana recognized President Harrington, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and round glasses. Beside him sat Professor Wu, Dr. Bennett, and the board member from the hearing, James Thompson. At the far end of the table, unexpectedly, was Dean Phillips from the mathematics department. "Miss Vergara, thank you for joining us." President Harrington greeted her warmly. "Please, have a seat." Liana settled into the chair, indicated, acutely aware of the formal atmosphere. "Thank you for inviting me, sir. I'll get straight to the point," Harrington began, removing his glasses. "The events of the past week have brought to light troubling patterns within our institution. Your courage in presenting evidence of discrimination has prompted a thorough review of our practices." He gestured to Thompson, who slid a folder across the table to Liana. "We've confirmed your statistical analysis," Thompson explained, "and expanded it across departments. The pattern you identified isn't limited to Professor Alden, though he appears to be one of the most egregious cases." Liana opened the folder, finding pages of data breakdowns by department, demographic groups, and graduation outcomes. Her mathematical mind immediately began processing the patterns, clear evidence of systemic bias affecting students from underrepresented backgrounds. "This isn't entirely surprising," Wu commented, noticing Liana's expression. "Many institutions face these challenges. What's rare is the willingness to acknowledge and address them." President Harrington nodded solemnly. "Which brings us to why we've asked you here today. First, I want to personally assure you that your scholarship is not only secure, but will be upgraded to a full scholarship, effective immediately. Liana's breath caught. A full scholarship would mean her parents could stop working extra shifts. Her father could finally get the medical treatment he'd been postponing. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Additionally," Harrington continued, "Professor Alden has been placed on administrative leave pending a faculty ethics review. His future at Princeton will depend on his willingness to acknowledge his biases and commit to change." Dr. Bennett cleared his throat, which, based on my 40 years of knowing Richard Alden, seems unlikely. "There's more," Dean Phillips spoke up, leaning forward. "The mathematics department has been authorized to create a new initiative focusing on cross-cultural mathematical traditions. Given your unique perspective and demonstrated excellence, Miss Vergara, we'd like you to be involved as an undergraduate research assistant." Liana blinked in surprise. "Me? But I'm only a sophomore." "Sometimes fresh perspectives are exactly what's needed," Wu said. "Your approach to the Salazar-Klein theorem demonstrated an intuitive understanding of how cultural contexts inform mathematical thinking. That's precisely what this initiative aims to explore. We're calling it the Cultural Patterns in Mathematical Thinking Initiative," Phillips explained, his enthusiasm evident. "And exploring how different cultures throughout history have approached mathematical concepts, often arriving at similar conclusions through entirely different methods. Like the geometric patterns in Tanalak weaving," Liana murmured, touching the brooch on her lapel. "Exactly," Wu nodded. "Indigenous mathematical knowledge has been overlooked by Western academia for too long. This initiative aims to change that." President Harrington smiled. "There's one more thing, Miss Vergara. The university would like to establish a peer support program for underrepresented students in STEM fields. We'd like you to help design it." Liana's mind raced with the implications. Not only had her scholarship been secured, but she was being offered opportunities she could never have imagined just a week ago. The tide had turned so completely, it was almost disorienting. "This feels like a lot," she admitted. "It is," Thompson agreed. "But institutions only change when brave individuals force them to confront their failings. You've done that, Miss Vergara. Now we're asking you to help us do better." As the meeting concluded and Liana walked across the autumn-painted campus, she felt strangely detached, as if watching herself from a distance. So much had changed so quickly. She pulled out her phone to call her parents, but paused, wondering how to explain everything that had happened. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Chelsea." "So? What happened? We're all dying to know." "I got a full scholarship," Liana said, the reality finally sinking in. "And they're starting some new initiative about cultural mathematics and want me involved." "That's amazing!" Chelsea exclaimed. "We need to celebrate. Everyone's meeting at the coffee house in 20 minutes. "Chelsea, wait," Liana interrupted. "Have you heard anything about Alden?" There was a brief pause. "It's all over campus. He cleared out his office this morning. Rumor has it he's being forced to retire." That evening, as Liana sat with her new friends at the campus coffee house, Raj, Chelsea, and several other students who had shared their own stories of facing bias, a familiar figure appeared at their table. "And Miss Vergara," Professor Alden said stiffly, his face pale and drawn. The room fell silent as students turned to watch. "I wonder if I might have a word." Liana felt every eye on her as she nodded and followed him to a quieter corner. "I've been asked to make formal apologies to several students before I depart," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "You're at the top of that list." Liana waited, maintaining eye contact even as Alden struggled to meet her gaze. "I made assumptions about your abilities and background that were incorrect," he continued. "Your mathematical approach, while unconventional by Western standards, was innovative and sound. I should have recognized that. The apology was clearly rehearsed and likely coerced." But Liana noticed something unexpected in his eyes, a flicker of genuine regret, perhaps even shame. "Professor," she said carefully, "mathematics doesn't belong to any single culture or tradition. The patterns I saw in that equation I first recognized in the woven fabrics my grandmother collected." She touched her tinalak brooch. Indigenous Filipino weavers were creating fractal patterns and exploring symmetry through their art long before Western mathematicians formalized those concepts. Alden looked at the brooch, then at Liana, something shifting in his expression. Perhaps," he said slowly, "there are aspects of mathematical history I've overlooked." It wasn't a full acknowledgement, but coming from Alden it was revolutionary. As he turned to leave, Liana called after him. "Professor, the university is establishing a new initiative on cross-cultural mathematical traditions. Your historical knowledge could be valuable. If you were willing to approach it with an open mind." Alden stopped, his back still turned. "I'm being asked to retire, Miss Vergara." "Officially, you're on administrative leave pending review," Liana corrected. "Reviews can have different outcomes depending on demonstrated growth." He glanced back at her, genuine surprise in his eyes. "Oh, why would you suggest such a thing after what I did?" Liana thought of her grandmother's words about patterns and connections, about looking back to move forward. "Because true justice isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about transformation." Alden left without another word, but something had shifted, not just for him, but for Liana as well. The victory wasn't in seeing him humbled, but in creating the possibility for genuine change. When she returned to her friends, Chelsea looked at her questioningly. "What did you say to him?" "He looked like he'd seen a ghost." Liana smiled, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders. "And I just reminded him that mathematics, like justice, is all about recognizing patterns." Winter descended on Princeton, turning the Gothic spires into frost-covered monuments against leaden skies. As students hurried between buildings wrapped in scarves and heavy coats, Liana found herself busier than ever. The full scholarship had lifted an enormous financial burden, allowing her to reduce her work hours at the library and focus on her studies and the new initiatives she'd helped launch. The Cultural Patterns in Mathematical Thinking initiative had grown from concept to reality with surprising speed. What began as casual meetings with Professor Wu and Dean Phillips expanded to include visiting scholars, graduate students, and even a few progressive-minded older faculty members who brought valuable historical perspectives to the discussion. Liana's role had evolved from simply providing input to co-designing curriculum modules that explored mathematical concepts through diverse cultural lenses. Her first major contribution, a teaching unit on geometric patterns in indigenous Filipino weaving and their connection to fractal mathematics, was scheduled to be piloted in the spring semester. "You've created something truly innovative here," Professor Wu commented one evening as they reviewed Liana's presentation materials. This bridges cultural appreciation and rigorous mathematical theory in a way I've rarely seen. I keep thinking about all the brilliant mathematical minds throughout history who never had formal training," Liana replied, arranging images of tinalak patterns alongside their mathematical analyses. How many discoveries were ignored because they came from weavers instead of professors? From farmers instead of researchers? Wu nodded thoughtfully. The gatekeeping of knowledge has been one of academia's greatest failings. That's why the mentorship program is just as important, Liana added, referring to the peer support initiative she'd helped establish. Bayanihan in STEM, named after the Filipino concept of communal unity and cooperation, had quickly grown from a small support group to a campus-wide program with over 40 active members. They offered tutoring, application assistance, emotional support, and professional development workshops for underrepresented students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Chelsea, who had surprised everyone by volunteering as an administrative coordinator, stuck her head into the conference room where Liana and Wu were working. Sorry to interrupt, but you have that Zoom call with the high school outreach program in 10 minutes, she reminded Liana. Thanks, Chelsea. I'll wrap up here. As Wu gathered her materials, she studied Liana with a perceptive gaze. You've taken on quite a lot this semester. How are you balancing everything? Liana sighed, allowing herself a moment of honesty. Some days better than others, but it all feels necessary. Like this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Just remember that your own education and well-being matter too, Wu advised gently. Movements need leaders who sustain themselves for the long journey. The wisdom in those words struck Liana deeply. Since the hearing, she had thrown herself into every opportunity to create change, sometimes at the expense of her own needs. Just last week, her mother had commented during their weekly call that Liana sounded exhausted. You're changing the world already, Anak, her mother had said. But don't forget to live in it too. Those words echoed in Liana's mind as she hurried across campus to her dorm room for the video call. The winter sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered quad. Students streamed toward the dining halls for dinner, laughing and talking in groups, while Liana moved in the opposite direction, alone. For a moment, she felt a pang of something like loneliness, a reminder that while her life had transformed dramatically in recent months, there were still sacrifices involved in the path she'd chosen. Back in her room, Liana quickly set up her laptop for the call with aspiring mathematicians, a program for high school students from underserved communities. As the faces of a dozen teenagers appeared on her screen, her momentary melancholy evaporated. Hi everyone, I'm Liana Vergara, sophomore at Princeton studying mathematics. I'm excited to talk with you today about applications to competitive universities, especially for students interested in STEM fields. For the next hour, she answered questions, shared her experiences, and offered practical advice. The students' eagerness and brilliance reminded her powerfully of herself just a few years earlier, full of potential but uncertain of their place in elite academic spaces. How do you deal with people who think you don't belong there? Asked a young Latina girl, her question cutting straight to the heart of what so many were thinking but afraid to voice. Liana paused, wanting to give an honest answer rather than empty reassurance. That's something I still navigate every day, she admitted. There will always be people who question your right to be in these spaces. The key is finding the people who recognize your value and building community with them. And remembering that you belong there, not despite your background and experiences, but because of them. Diverse perspectives make science and mathematics stronger. After the call ended, Liana sat quietly, reflecting on her own words. How much had she changed since that day in Alden's classroom? The Liana who had trembled as she approached the blackboard seemed like a different person from the confident mentor who now inspired younger students. Her phone buzzed with a text from Raj. Dinner? A bunch of us are heading to the dining hall now. On my way, she replied, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. As she walked across the darkened campus, snow crunching beneath her boots, Liana reflected on Professor Wu's words about sustainability. Perhaps allowing herself ordinary moments of friendship and rest wasn't a distraction from her larger goals, but an essential part of achieving them. In the warmth of the dining hall, she found Raj, Chelsea, and several other friends from Bayanihan in STEM already gathered around a large table. They made room for her, pulling up another chair. We were just talking about the spring break trip to Washington, said Miguel, a junior studying computer science. The conference organizers confirmed our panel about diversity initiatives in university STEM programs. That's fantastic, Liana exclaimed, loading her plate with food. Who's presenting? You, hopefully, Chelsea grinned. As the mastermind behind everything, Liana shook her head. This has been a group effort from the beginning. We should all present together. As the conversation flowed around her, ideas for the panel, plans for next semester's mentorship pairings, someone's research breakthrough, Liana felt something settle within her. This was what true belonging felt like. Not just being accepted, but being an integral part of creating something meaningful together. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Liana's phone rang with a FaceTime call from home. Her parents' faces appeared on the screen, both looking more rested than she had seen them in years. "Anak, we have news," her father said, beaming. "We paid off the second mortgage today." "What, how?" Liana asked, stunned. The mortgage on their small house had been taken out specifically to help with her Princeton expenses. "Your full scholarship made all the difference," her mother explained, eyes shining. "Without those extra payments, we've been able to catch up on everything, and your papa finally saw the specialist for his breathing. The doctor says it's nothing serious," her father rushed to add, "but just needed the right medication." As they continued sharing updates, her brother Gabriel's improving grades, her mother's promotion at the hospital, Liana felt tears welling in her eyes. This was the ripple effect of everything that had happened. Not just institutional change, but real impact on the lives of those she loved most. "We are so proud of you," her mother said softly. "And not just for your achievements, but for who you are becoming." After saying goodnight to her parents, Liana stood by her window, looking out at the snow-covered campus. The girl who had arrived at Princeton clutching her Tanalak pattern notebook, terrified and determined, had transformed into someone who was helping transform the institution itself. She touched the gold sun pendant at her neck, thinking of her grandmother's words, "Ipakita mo sa kanila ang iyong talino." Show them your brilliance. She had done that, but she had also discovered that true brilliance wasn't just about solving equations on a blackboard. It was about recognizing patterns of inequity and working to reweave them into something more just, more inclusive, something that reflected the complex, beautiful patterns of humanity itself. Spring arrived at Princeton with an explosion of cherry blossoms and renewed energy across campus. The semester was racing toward its conclusion, with final projects, exams, and end-of-year events filling everyone's calendars. For Liana, the most significant upcoming event was the official launch of the Cultural Patterns in Mathematical Thinking initiative, scheduled for the final week of classes. What had begun as conversations in Wu's office had grown into a formal academic program with dedicated funding, administrative support, and academic recognition. The president himself is attending the launch, Dean Phillips announced during their planning meeting, barely containing his excitement. Several major donors have expressed interest as well. This could become one of Princeton's signature interdisciplinary programs. "As long as we maintain its core mission," Liana reminded him gently. "This isn't just about repackaging traditional mathematics with multicultural window dressing. It's about fundamentally rethinking how we define and teach mathematical concepts." Phillips nodded, having learned over the months to take Liana's input seriously despite her undergraduate status. "Absolutely. That's why your presentation is the centerpiece of the launch event." Wu smiled at the exchange, a hint of pride in her eyes. "Speaking of presentations, have you finalized your materials for the symposium portion?" Liana nodded, though a flutter of nervousness stirred in her stomach. "Almost. I'm still refining the section on symmetry transformations in Tanalak patterns." "May I make a suggestion?" Wu said, sliding a business card across the table. "This might help." Liana read the card. "Dr. Enrique Salazar, Professor of Mathematical Sciences, MIT. Her eyes widened. "The Salazar of the Salazar-Klein theorem?" "The very same," Wu confirmed. "He's fascinated by your application of his work and has agreed to consult on your presentation. He'll be attending the launch as well." The thought of presenting in front of the legendary mathematician whose work she had built upon sent a wave of both excitement and terror through Liana. "I don't know what to say. You might start with, 'Hello,'" Wu suggested with a rare touch of humor. "I've already shared your email with him. Expect to hear from him soon." As the meeting concluded and Liana walked to her afternoon class, her phone buzzed with a notification. An email from Dr. Salazar had already arrived, warm and enthusiastic, suggesting a video call to discuss her work. She was so absorbed in reading it that she nearly collided with someone coming around the corner of the mathematics building. Excuse me, I wasn't looking," she began, then froze when she recognized Professor Alden. Their paths hadn't crossed since their conversation at the coffee house months ago. She had heard he was still on campus in some capacity, but had assumed he was working on independent research during his administrative leave. "Miss Vergara," he acknowledged, his tone neutral rather than hostile. "I understand congratulations are in order for your initiative's upcoming launch." "Thank you," she replied cautiously. "I didn't realize you were following its progress." A complicated expression crossed his face. "I've been consulting on certain historical aspects of the curriculum. Professor Wu thought my background in the history of mathematical thought might be useful." Liana couldn't hide her surprise. "You're working with the initiative in a limited capacity," he clarified. "Part of my professional development plan." The way he said the last words suggested they came from an official agreement rather than personal choice. An awkward silence fell between them. "Your suggestion," Alden finally said, "about transformation rather than punishment. It appears the administration took it to heart. My continued employment is contingent upon demonstrated growth and contribution to diversity initiatives." Liana wasn't sure how to respond. The idea that her words had influenced the university's handling of Alden was both empowering and disconcerting. "And has it been valuable? Your involvement?" she asked carefully. Alden considered the question with surprising thoughtfulness. "It has been educational, particularly the work from Southeast Asian mathematical traditions that I had previously overlooked." He gestured to the building behind them. "I was just leaving a meeting with Professor Santiago from the University of the Philippines, who's visiting this week. His work on pre-colonial Filipino mathematical systems is quite remarkable." The genuine intellectual interest in his voice caught Liana off guard. People could change, it seemed, even if imperfectly and reluctantly. "I'm glad to hear that," she said sincerely. Alden nodded, then continued past her. After a few steps, he paused and turned back. "Your analysis of the Salazar-Klein application, it was genuinely innovative. I should have said that from the beginning." Before she could respond, he was walking away, his posture still stiff but somehow less imposing than she remembered. That interaction lingered in Liana's mind as she met with Dr. Salazar via video call that evening. The renowned mathematician, with his kind eyes and enthusiastic gestures, couldn't have been more different from Alden. "The connection you made between the recursive patterns in Tanalak weaving and the dimensional transformations in my theorem, absolutely brilliant," Salazar exclaimed after Liana explained her approach. "It's exactly the kind of cross-cultural mathematical thinking we need more of." "It wasn't entirely my invention," Liana admitted. "Growing up watching my grandmother analyze these patterns, I just recognized the mathematical principles already embedded in them." "That's precisely the point," Salazar agreed. "Indigenous knowledge systems have sophisticated mathematical frameworks that Western academia has largely ignored. Your contribution is in building bridges between these traditions." As they discussed her presentation and potential future research directions, Liana felt a sense of validation that went beyond academic recognition. Here was one of the field's most respected figures, treating her cultural perspective not as an interesting novelty, but as a valuable contribution to mathematical understanding. "You know," Salazar said thoughtfully toward the end of their call, "I'm supervising a special summer research program at MIT focused on ethnomathematics. After seeing your work, I'd like to formally invite you to participate." Liana nearly dropped her phone. "At MIT? With you?" "With several colleagues and me, yes. It's a 6-week program with a generous stipend. Would you be interested?" "Absolutely," Liana exclaimed, then hesitated. "But I already committed to helping develop next year's curriculum for our initiative here." I've already discussed this with Naomi, Professor Wu, Salazar revealed with a smile. She agrees this would be beneficial for both you and the Princeton program. The work you do with us could directly inform your curriculum development. After the call ended, Liana sat in stunned silence. From fighting to keep her scholarship to being recruited for an elite summer program at MIT, the trajectory of her academic journey had transformed completely in less than a year. She immediately called her parents to share the news, their pride and excitement palpable even through the phone. Then she messaged Raj and Chelsea, who insisted on an immediate celebration. Within an hour, Liana found herself at their favorite off-campus cafe, surrounded by friends raising coffee mugs in her honor. To Liana, future Fields Medal winner and revolutionary mathematician, Raj toasted dramatically. To all of us, Liana countered, raising her own mug, for creating spaces where we all can thrive. Chelsea clinked her mug against Liana's. It's amazing to think about how this all started, with one incredible moment at a blackboard. As their conversation flowed from academic achievements to summer plans to the latest campus gossip, Liana felt a deep sense of belonging that had nothing to do with institutional approval or academic recognition. She had found her community, people who valued both her mathematical brilliance and her cultural perspective, who saw her whole self as an asset rather than an anomaly. Later, walking back to campus under the star-filled spring sky, Liana reflected on the patterns that had emerged in her life, how moments of challenge had created opportunities for growth, how confronting barriers had opened new pathways not just for her, but for others who would follow. The gold sun pendant at her neck caught the moonlight as she reached up to touch it, a gesture that had become almost unconscious over the months. It was more than a piece of jewelry now. It was a symbol of the journey from survival to transformation, from merely proving she belonged to actively reshaping what belonging meant. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, finalizing her presentation, preparing for finals, planning for the MIT summer program. But tonight, under the vast canopy of stars, Liana allowed herself to simply exist in the moment, a moment that her younger self could hardly have imagined possible. The day of the Cultural Patterns in Mathematical Thinking Initiative launch arrived with perfect spring weather, clear blue skies, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming flowers across campus. The historic McCosh Hall, with its oak-paneled walls and stained glass windows, had been selected for the event, symbolizing the integration of traditional academic spaces with new, inclusive approaches to knowledge. By mid-morning, the hall was buzzing with activity as staff arranged chairs, tested audiovisual equipment, and set up display panels featuring mathematical patterns from cultures around the world. Liana arrived early, dressed in a professional blue dress with her Tenalic brooch prominently displayed and her grandmother's gold sun pendant at her neck. "Everything looks amazing," she told Professor Wu, who was supervising the final arrangements. "I can't believe this is really happening." "Believe it," Wu replied with a smile. "Your vision helped create this." As they walked through the space, checking details and making minor adjustments, Dean Phillips approached, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. "Liana, I'd like you to meet Dr. Salazar in person," Phillips said. "He arrived this morning from Boston." "Miss Vergara," Salazar greeted her warmly, clasping her hand in both of his. "Finally, we meet face to face. I've been looking forward to your presentation ever since our video call. It's an honor to meet you, Doctor." "Salazar," Liana replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her nervousness. "The honor is mine," he insisted. "Few mathematicians have applied my theorem with such creative insight. Fewer still have connected it to cultural traditions I had never considered." As they discussed the final details of her presentation, more guests began to arrive. Faculty members, administrators, donors, and a surprising number of students from various departments. Liana spotted Raj and Chelsea helping direct people to their seats, both dressed formally for the occasion. Your friends are quite dedicated, Salazar observed. They're more than friends, Liana replied. They're partners in everything we've built here. At exactly 10 a.m., President Harrington stepped to the podium to officially open the event. The hall fell silent as he surveyed the packed room. And today marks an important milestone in Princeton's ongoing commitment to excellence and inclusion, he began. Yikutil, the Cultural Patterns in Mathematical Thinking initiative, represents not just a new academic program, but a new way of understanding how knowledge is created and shared across cultures and traditions. As he continued, acknowledging the work of Wu, Phillips, and the various faculty and students involved, Liana felt a surge of emotion. Sitting in the front row, surrounded by people who had supported her journey, she could hardly believe how far they had come from those first tense moments in Alden's classroom. And now, Harrington concluded, I am pleased to introduce the student whose remarkable insights helped catalyze this initiative. Please welcome sophomore mathematics major Liana Vergara. The applause that followed was thunderous, especially from the student section where members of Bayanihan in STEM cheered enthusiastically. Heart-pounding, Liana rose and walked to the podium, her presentation materials already loaded on the computer. Thank you, President Harrington, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. And thank you all for being here today. She took a deep breath, scanning the audience. To her surprise, she spotted Professor Alden sitting near the back, his expression attentive rather than dismissive. Mathematics has often been presented as a universal language, Liana continued, transcending cultural differences. While there's truth in that perspective, it's also incomplete. The ways we conceptualize, visualize, and apply mathematical principles are profoundly shaped by our cultural contexts and experiences. As she advanced to her first slide, a side-by-side comparison of a Tanalak pattern and its mathematical representation, Liana felt herself settling into the material, her nervousness giving way to the genuine passion she felt for the subject. What you're seeing here is not just a decorative design, she explained. This pattern, created by Tiboli weavers in the Philippines for generations, encodes sophisticated mathematical concepts, including fractal recursion, symmetry transformations, and proportional relationships. Over the next 40 minutes, Liana guided the audience through a journey connecting indigenous mathematical knowledge with formal academic theories. She demonstrated how the Salazar-Klein theorem could be visualized through Tanalak patterns, and conversely, how Tanalak design principles could inform new approaches to complex mathematical problems. When I first applied these principles in Professor Alden's class, she said, acknowledging him with a nod, I wasn't trying to challenge conventional methods. I was simply seeing the problem through the mathematical lens I had inherited from my cultural background. As she neared the conclusion of her presentation, Liana displayed a diagram showing the interconnected nature of mathematical traditions across cultures and time periods. In the future of mathematics, and indeed all academic disciplines, lies not in maintaining artificial boundaries between knowledge systems, but in recognizing their complementary strengths. When we bring diverse perspectives to the table, we don't dilute excellence, we enhance it. She paused, looking out at the attentive faces before her. This initiative is just one step toward creating a more inclusive, more creative, and ultimately more rigorous approach to mathematics. I'm honored to be part of this journey, and I invite all of you to join us in reimagining what mathematical thinking can be. The silence that followed her final words quickly gave way to sustained applause. As Liana returned to her seat, she saw that many in the audience were giving her a standing ovation, led by Dr. Salazar himself. Wu squeezed her hand as she sat down. Perfectly done, she whispered. The remainder of the morning featured presentations from faculty members involved in the initiative, each highlighting different aspects of the program's curriculum and research agenda. After a catered lunch where Liana found herself surrounded by faculty and donors eager to discuss her ideas, the afternoon session began with panel discussions on implementing cross-cultural approaches in mathematics education. During the final panel, featuring Liana alongside Wu, Salazar, and two other professors, an unexpected question came from the audience. "This all sounds wonderful in theory," came a skeptical male voice, "but aren't you concerned that modifying our rigorous mathematical curriculum to accommodate cultural sensitivities might water down the standards that have made Princeton a world-class institution?" Liana recognized the questioner as Professor Whitman from the engineering department, known for his conservative views on curriculum. A tense murmur ran through the audience. Before the moderator could intervene, another voice spoke up. "If I may address that question," said Professor Alden, rising from his seat. All heads turned in surprise. "As someone who has taught mathematics at Princeton for over 30 years, Alden continued, I initially shared similar concerns. I believed that the traditional Western mathematical canon represented the pinnacle of rigor and excellence." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I was wrong. What Ms. Vergara and this initiative have demonstrated is that incorporating diverse mathematical traditions doesn't dilute rigor, it demands even greater rigor. It challenges us to examine our assumptions about what constitutes mathematical knowledge and how it can be expressed." The room had fallen completely silent, everyone aware of the significance of Alden's unexpected advocacy. "After reviewing the curriculum materials developed for this initiative," he concluded, "I can state unequivocally that they meet or exceed Princeton's highest standards. The difference is that they also expand our understanding of what those standards should encompass." As Alden returned to his seat amid surprised applause, Liana caught his eye and nodded slightly in acknowledgement. What had transpired wasn't just a personal victory or vindication. It was evidence that genuine transformation was possible, even in the most entrenched academic spaces. The launch event concluded with President Harrington announcing permanent funding for the initiative and unveiling plans for a dedicated center that would open the following year. As attendees mingled during the closing reception, Liana found herself at the center of a constant stream of congratulations and questions. "You did it," Chelsea said, appearing at her side with a plate of hors d'oeuvres. "You literally changed Princeton." "We did it," Liana corrected her. "All of us together." As the crowd finally began to thin, Dr. Salazar approached with several colleagues. "Miss Vergara, we're having dinner to continue the discussion about the summer program at MIT. Would you join us?" "I'd be honored," she replied, then hesitated. "Actually, could you give me just a moment? There's something I need to do first." Making her way across the room, Liana approached Professor Alden, who was gathering his materials to leave. "Professor," she said quietly, "thank you for what you said today. It meant a lot." Alden looked at her, something like respect in his eyes. "I merely stated the truth as I've come to understand it. Still, it couldn't have been easy." He considered this, then nodded slightly. "Change rarely is, but sometimes necessary." After a pause, he added, "Your presentation was excellent. Your grandmother would be proud." The mention of her grandmother caught Liana by surprise. "How did you know about my grandmother?" "Professor Wu mentioned her influence on your mathematical thinking," Alden replied. "It reminded me of my own grandfather, who first introduced me to mathematics through architecture." A brief, genuine smile crossed his face. "And perhaps we all stand on the shoulders of those who taught us to see patterns in the world." As Liana rejoined Salazar and his colleagues for dinner, she felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with humiliation at a blackboard had transformed not just her own path, but the institution itself. More importantly, it had opened doors for countless students who would follow, students who might now find their diverse perspectives celebrated rather than suppressed. Later that night, alone in her room, Liana called her grandmother in Manila to share the day's events. As the elderly woman's proud voice came through the phone, tears filled Liana's eyes. "Ipakita mo sa kanila ang iyong talino," her grandmother said, echoing the words she had spoken when gifting Liana the sun pendant. "You showed them your brilliance, anak, and more importantly, you showed them our brilliance, the mathematical wisdom our people have always carried." "I couldn't have done it without everything you taught me, Lola," Liana replied softly. "No, my child. I simply showed you how to see the patterns. You were the one brave enough to share them with the world." 2 years later, the spring commencement ceremony at Princeton was always a spectacle of tradition and celebration. Under a vast white tent on the rolling lawns before Nassau Hall, hundreds of graduates in black gowns and mortarboards sat in neat rows, while proud families filled thousands of white chairs arranged behind them. Among the sea of black-robed seniors, Liana Vergara sat with her fellow mathematics majors, a vibrant tenor-lac sash draped over her academic regalia, a personal touch that had become increasingly common among students celebrating their cultural heritage at graduation. The past 2 years had transformed both Liana and Princeton itself. The Cultural Patterns in Mathematical Thinking initiative had expanded into the Center for Indigenous Mathematical Knowledge, occupying a renovated building at the heart of campus. The center now hosted visiting scholars from around the world, offered specialized courses, and coordinated research projects exploring diverse mathematical traditions. Bayanihan in STEM had grown from a single campus program to a nationwide network with chapters at 23 universities, supporting thousands of underrepresented students pursuing careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And Liana herself had blossomed from a sophomore fighting for her place to a graduating senior with honors, a published researcher, and an incoming PhD student at MIT, where she would continue her groundbreaking work under Dr. Salazar's mentorship. Liana Marisol Vergara called the dean, and Liana rose to cross the stage. As she accepted her diploma, a loud cheer erupted from the audience. Her parents, brother and grandmother, who had flown in from Manila for the occasion, along with dozens of students from Bayanihan in STEM, many wearing traditional elements from their own cultures. President Harrington shook her hand warmly. "Congratulations, Ms. Vergara. Princeton is better because you were here." After the ceremony, amid the chaos of thousands of families searching for their graduates, Liana spotted her parents waving frantically near a large oak tree, their designated meeting point. She rushed toward them, carefully navigating through the crowds in her graduation heels. "Anak!" her mother cried, wrapping Liana in a tight embrace. "Adu, we are so proud of you." Her father, looking healthier than he had in years, wiped tears from his eyes as he joined the hug. "My brilliant daughter, a Princeton graduate." Behind them stood her grandmother, elegant in a traditional Filipino formal dress, her eyes shining with pride. "Maganda," she said softly, touching Liana's face. "Beautiful." Gabriel, now a high school senior with college acceptance letters of his own, grinned as he filmed everything on his phone. "History in the making, folks," he narrated. "The first Dr. Vergara." "Not yet," Liana laughed. "I still have to get through the PhD program." "It's just a matter of time," came a familiar voice. Professor Wu approached, elegant in her academic regalia, followed by Dean Phillips and Dr. Salazar, who had come specifically for the graduation. "We're stealing your daughter for a quick photo by the mathematics building," Wu told Liana's parents. "The department wants to document this moment." Of course," her father said proudly. "My daughter, the mathematician." As they walked across the busy campus, Liana was stopped repeatedly by other graduates, underclassmen, and faculty members offering congratulations and well wishes. What would have been a 10-minute walk took nearly half an hour. "You've made quite an impact here," Salazar observed. "It will be felt long after you've gone." "That was always the goal," Liana replied. "Not just to prove I belonged, but to make it easier for others to belong too." At the mathematics building, a surprise awaited. Gathered on the steps were the current members of Bayanihan in STEM, along with Raj, now a graduate student in engineering, and Chelsea, headed to law school in the fall. But most surprising was the presence of Professor Alden, standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the group. "We wanted to honor the person who started it all," explained Miguel, now the president of Bayanihan in STEM. "Without you, Liana, none of this would exist." As the group arranged themselves for photos, Alden approached Liana. "Congratulations, Miss Vergara," he said formally, then corrected himself with a small smile. "Liana, MIT is fortunate to have you." "Thank you, Professor," she replied. "I heard you'll be teaching a course at the center next fall." He nodded. "On the historical development of mathematical notation across cultures. Your work helped me see gaps in my own understanding that I'm now attempting to address." After a slight hesitation, he added, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For your suggestion of transformation rather than punishment. It allowed me to confront my biases without defensiveness. It changed the course of my career and my thinking." Before Liana could respond, they were called for the group photo. The resulting image captured a moment of transformation. Students from diverse backgrounds standing proudly beside faculty members of different generations, all united by their connection to mathematics and to the changes Liana had helped initiate. Later that evening, the Vergara family hosted a graduation dinner at a local Filipino restaurant they had reserved for the occasion. The space overflowed with friends, mentors, and fellow students, the air filled with laughter, music, and the savory aromas of Filipino cuisine. As glasses were raised for a toast, Liana's father stood, emotion evident in his voice. "When we came to this country, we dreamed of opportunities for our children," he began, "but we could never have imagined this moment. Liana, you have exceeded every dream we had for you, not just with your achievements, but with the way you have lifted others as you climbed." Her mother stood next to him, adding, "You remembered what it means to be Filipino, Bayanihan, the spirit of communal unity and cooperation. You brought that spirit to your university and changed it forever." As dinner progressed into dancing, with traditional Filipino dances mingling with contemporary American music, Liana took a moment to step outside for a breath of fresh air. The spring evening was perfect, warm with a gentle breeze, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. She touched the gold sun pendant at her neck, thinking of the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the frightened yet determined sophomore facing ridicule at a blackboard to the confident graduate headed for a prestigious PhD program, the transformation seemed almost unbelievable. Wu joined her on the restaurant's small patio, handing her a glass of water. "A penny for your thoughts?" Liana smiled. "I was just thinking about patterns, how they repeat and transform like in mathematics. 4 years ago, I couldn't have imagined being here. And yet, here you are," Wu said, "creating new patterns for others to follow." "What happens next?" Liana asked, suddenly feeling the weight of transition. "MIT, the PhD, then what?" Wu laughed softly. "The beautiful thing about patterns is that they continue to evolve in ways we can't always predict. But I suspect your work is just beginning, Liana Vergara." Inside, the music changed to a traditional Filipino folk dance, and Liana's grandmother appeared at the door, gesturing for them to return. "Come," the elderly woman insisted. "It's time for pandango sa ilaw. Liana must dance." As Liana rejoined the celebration, taking her place in the circle of dancers performing the traditional dance with lights, where candles balanced on the head and hands created patterns of movement and light, she felt a profound sense of completion and beginning. Here, surrounded by family, friends, and mentors, dancing a pattern that had been preserved through generations, she understood that her journey had never been just about proving her mathematical brilliance or fighting for her place at an elite institution. It had been about recognizing the patterns that connected all things, mathematical formulas to cultural traditions, personal struggles to systemic changes, individual achievements to communal progress. In seeing these connections and helping others see them too, Liana had found not just success, but purpose. The following morning, as the Vergara family prepared to leave Princeton, Liana to begin her summer research at MIT, her parents and brother to return to New Jersey, her grandmother to visit relatives before flying back to Manila, they took one last walk around the campus that had been the setting for so much transformation. At the mathematics building, Liana paused, looking up at the imposing Gothic architecture that had once seemed so foreign and intimidating. "I remember the first time I saw this building," she told her family. "I felt so small, like I didn't belong here. Now it feels like home." Her grandmother took her hand, studying her face with wise eyes. "Remember, Anak, home is not just a place where you belong. Home is a place you help create for others to belong to." As they continued their walk, passing groups of summer students and visiting families, Liana noticed how many of them were people of color, speaking various languages, wearing elements of their cultural heritage proudly. The campus was gradually becoming more reflective of the diverse world beyond its gates, a transformation she had played a part in accelerating. Near the main gate, they encountered a young Filipino girl with her parents, clearly on a campus tour. The girl, perhaps 14 or 15, was taking photos of everything, her eyes wide with wonder. On impulse, Liana approached them. "Are you thinking of coming to Princeton someday?" she asked the girl. "I hope so," the girl replied shyly. "I love mathematics, but..." She hesitated, glancing at her parents. "But sometimes she worries if she'll fit in at a place like this," her mother finished, the concern of a parent evident in her voice. Liana smiled, recognizing her younger self in the girl's uncertainty. "But let me tell you something about Princeton," she said, gesturing toward the campus behind her. "It might seem intimidating, but there are people here working hard to make sure students like you not only fit in, but thrive." She told them briefly about Bayanihan in STEM and the Center for Indigenous Mathematical Knowledge, writing down contact information for future reference. "The path isn't always easy," Liana admitted, "but it's worth taking, and you won't walk it alone." As they parted ways, the girl looked back at Liana with newfound determination in her eyes, a spark that Liana recognized intimately. Later, as the family loaded their luggage into the car, Liana's father put his arm around her shoulders. "But you know, when we first came to this country, we worried whether we were doing the right thing for you and Gabriel," he confessed, "whether the struggles would be worth it." "Were they?" Liana asked, though she already knew his answer. He looked at her, then at the campus behind them, and smiled. "Beyond our wildest dreams, Anak. Beyond our wildest dreams." As they drove away from Princeton for the last time as a student, Liana watched the Gothic spires recede in the rearview mirror. The buildings would remain, centuries old and seemingly unchanging. But within their walls, the patterns were shifting, becoming more complex, more inclusive, more beautiful in their diversity. And Liana Vergara, once an outsider fighting to prove she belonged, had become part of the new pattern emerging, a pattern that would continue to evolve long after she had gone, inviting others to add their own unique threads to the ever-expanding tapestry of knowledge. Looking ahead to the road before her, to MIT, to her PhD, to all the challenges and opportunities that awaited, Liana touched her grandmother's sun pendant one last time and smiled. The journey hadn't ended. It was just beginning anew. In her mind, she heard her grandmother's words once more, "Ipakita mo sa kanila ang iyong talino. Show them your brilliance." And she had. Not just her own brilliance, but the brilliant, diverse patterns of mathematical thinking that had always existed in cultures around the world. Patterns waiting to be recognized, valued, and woven together into new understandings. That perhaps was her greatest achievement, not just finding her own place in the academic world, but expanding that world to make room for all the brilliant minds that would follow, creating a future where no one would need to prove they belonged. My friends, we have reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you take from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.